What's going on, guys? My name is BJ and this is Practical Boys Garage. Now today I'm starting part 5 of this build series because we've got powder coating done, we've got the motor done, and all that's left to do, well, there's a lot left to do, but we're going to start with reassembly. Now as you can see on the table, I've got all the parts laid out. This is not where we're at. Guys, we're at part 5. This is supposed to be painted. Hang on, let's try a trick. Now that's more like it. This powder coating looks absolutely fantastic. We did so much work to get it to this point, but now it is time for final reassembly. And we're going to start with making this thing ultimately a rolling chassis and starting with that suspension. However, I still have quite a bit of cleaning to do. Now, I will be taking these parts individually. I'll be brushing them off and then ultimately repainting them. We want to make sure that everything looks nice because we don't want to put rusty old bolts and suspension components on brand new powder coating. Also, I'm going to go ahead and start attacking these rims. I've been procrastinating it because, well, they're just difficult and I really don't want to scratch them. So I'm going to be taking my time. If you know the history of this channel, you know tires and wheels, not my favorite thing. So without further ado, let's get started putting this thing together. All right, well, that first coat of black went on super smooth, and I'm very happy with how it's turning out so far. We still have at least one, if not two more coats before we can call it quits, but hey, we kind of anticipated that when we started painting. Now, if you did notice, I grabbed my oven, and I'm going to start putting the parts in the oven to bake around 120 to 150 degrees. Now, I'm not doing this to necessarily make the paint any harder. It still is spray paint at the end of the day, but we just want it to cure faster, so ultimately when I put this thing back together, I don't accidentally scratch it or rub any of the paint off. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and finish the second coat for now and ultimately keep rotating parts in and out of this oven before we can reassemble. All right, well, I definitely want to give this paint some time to set up and cure, so I'm going to go ahead and turn my attention towards this rear end reassembly. Now, I went ahead and laid out all the parts, hardware that we're going to be using to put this rear end back together. You will notice, though, I am missing the bearings on this rear hub. I went ahead and threw those into the freezer because freezing metal ultimately contracts it, and I'll have an easier time getting it into place. It was quite a fight trying to take them out, and I don't want to have a hassle of that with fresh powder coat. So I'm going to go ahead and grab those bearings. We're going to throw those in and get this rear end put back together. All right, guys, the rear end is completely assembled. Now, I did leave the bolts pretty loose as far as the adjustment is concerned, only because we will have to put the motor and the chain on and make the final adjustment at that time. So with that being said, for now, that rear end is finished. But I've been procrastinating what I really actually do not want to do in this project, and that's put the tires on these rims. Guys, I'm just afraid I'm going to scratch them, and I've just been staring at it for like the last 30 minutes. I can't wait any longer on the paint to dry. I literally would switch over to do the shocks because that seems more appetizing than this, but no longer can I put this off. It is time to get these mounted. So here we go. All right, we are a quarter of the way done. It turned out okay. I'm not super upset about it, just because right here in the lip, if you can see, it did take a little bit of paint off, but I think once that tire gets seated and rolls over, we might not be able to see all of it. So I've used more soap and water than I ever have in my entire life. That bottle's probably 1/3 soap and 2/3 water, and I just doused this thing. It actually went on pretty slick. So now I just need to make sure that the orientation of all the tires are in the correct way to line up on the four-wheeler, and I'm gonna go ahead, put you on a time lapse, and knock the rest of these out. Alright guys, well I have to say the wheels and tires look absolutely fantastic. Went on almost without a scratch. My anxiety is lowered so much now that this is accomplished. So the next thing I'm going to do is move on to my second least favorite step of this whole process, and that's reassembling the shocks and the springs. So I'm going to get you guys set up on the table and show you how I'm going to do it. Alright guys, so I've got our ratchet straps setting on the table along with all of our spring and shock setup. Now ultimately what I'm going to be doing is using these ratchet straps to compress these springs. That way we can fit all of our hardware inside. I could be using the standard spring compressor method, but they're just not very forgiving to fresh powder coat, and I just spent all that time making it look nice. I want to keep it that way. So what you'll see me do, I'll compress the spring, I'll grab all the hardware components, I'll get it all set up and tightened down before ultimately releasing it, and I'll check back in when I get to that point. I think that should be good. Alright, before I slam this down, I actually want to take the paint out of the inside of this thing. That way it doesn't scratch up the new paint going down. Woo! Alright, looks good, not a scratch. That's what we like to see. Alright. All right, now for as good as this thing actually looks, I should be super excited, but yet here I am disappointed with myself because I made a crucial error when assembling this rear end. Hopefully you guys can learn from my mistakes. So here's what I did. This axle is shorter on one side and longer on the other, and that's to allow for the rear swing arm to compensate for it being pushed to the right. Well, I didn't notice that until I actually got it assembled, and you can clearly see this right side is pushed way farther than the left. That's because it's supposed to be flipped around. So I'm going to go ahead and flip that axle, and then we're going to go ahead and start on the front. Okay guys, well that is more like it. Those wheels are lined up as they should be. Very happy with that. Now we can move our attention towards this front end. Now I went ahead, I grabbed all the parts needed for the front end to get reassembled. All the hardware has been cleaned up and ready to go. One thing to note is as you go through these front ends, make sure you grab some grease and grease up any of these sleeves, because ultimately all these parts are moving around quite a bit. You want to keep them well lubricated. Also, it doubles as a rust preventative. That way when water does get into these crevices, that it doesn't form any rust. So I'm going to go ahead, jump on this front end, and get this thing looking perfect. All right, guys, so I went ahead and buttoned up the entire front end. Everything is tightened down and where I exactly want it to be. It took me quite a bit of time. Time lapse definitely doesn't do me justice, but it is now completed and I'm happy with the results. I even went ahead and aligned those front wheels. That way all the steering and everything looks exactly spot on. Now, the next thing we're gonna do is move on to finishing up this rear end. Like I said earlier, it's still really loose. So what I'm gonna do is grab the motor, we're gonna throw it in, we're gonna get the chain on, and that way I can tighten this all down and say this rolling chassis is 100% completed. Hey, can one of you guys grab the bolt and put it in for me? All right, I'll do it myself. Thanks for nothing. That was fun. But it's in. All right, guys, well, I went ahead and turned this thing around on the table because I just wanted to see how aggressive it looks actually coming at you, and I gotta say, it does not disappoint. This thing looks super clean, super fresh. I am very happy with what we've been able to accomplish so far. Now, off camera, I did do a few things. I put on these dust covers on the wheels, threw the carb back on, also these chrome covers. Now, on the last time lapse, you did see me put the chain back on. I want to let you know I did leave it pretty tight, only because, well, two things. One, it's a brand new chain, so ultimately it will stretch. And two, we powder coated that sprocket completely, and that powder coating will come off, allowing some more slack in the system. So I wanted to make sure we had adjustment there. Now, I did have hopes at finishing this ATV on this video, but unfortunately it just didn't work out that way because I've still got a ton of work left to do. So with that being said, that is going to be an end to part number 5. Now, I've got to say thank you so much for watching this video. If you guys are still sticking around, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up. Let me know you enjoyed the content. Now, I can promise you that the next episode, we are going to be wrapping this thing up 100% and riding it around. Now, if you're not already subscribed to my channel, do yourself and myself a favor. At the bottom of the screen, right here is going to be an icon. Click on it. That way I can guarantee I will see you on the next one.
Always do it on my own, so I gotta get through it. And the only thing I know is to love what I'm doing. Never give up, never slow, till I finally prove it. Never listen to the no's, I just wanna keep moving. Keep my head up when I act, head up, that's a fact. Never looking back, I'ma keep myself on track. Keep my head up, staying strong, always moving on. Feel I don't belong, tell my thoughts to move along. Push myself to be the best, die with no regrets. Live with every breath, see my message start to spread. And I had so many dreams, then you hit your teens. Life ain't really what it seems, try to find out what it means. Always do it on my own, so I gotta get through it. And the only thing I know is to love what I'm doing.